Alright, so today we have Hamraz with us, and Hamraz recently received an admit from Indian School of Business, which is ISB Hyderabad, and he also interviewed with Michigan Ross School of Business, and he is currently awaiting his results. Now, interesting thing about Hamraz's experience is that his experience is slightly on the lower side. So now I will hand over the stage to Hamraz, and I will ask him to quickly introduce himself, speak a little bit about his experience, and take it from there.
Sure. So I'm Hamraz. I completed my undergraduation in chemical engineering in 2016. Post that, for around 2 years and 10 months, I have been working in a financial services firm as a business analyst. That's about my work ex.
Okay. All right. So on this video interview with Hamraz, what we are going to speak about is that we are going to cover 3 areas. So one is that we are going to speak with Hamraz about how candidates who have lower work ex, how they can go about writing their applications for top business schools. That's one. Second is that we will cover his interview experience at ISB, from which he has already received an admit. And finally, we will speak about his interview experience at Michigan Ross. Right? Okay, so let's get the first thing started. So, if Hamraz, can you quickly share about how you went about preparing your applications, and what were the biggest challenges that you faced?
So the biggest challenge that I faced while preparing the applications is coming up with good enough stories that are powerful and impactful to highlight my strengths and weaknesses. So since in business school applications, the stories from your college period, they don't make that much impact. So coming with relevant stories that are meaningful, honest, and they are impactful within this 2 years, 9 months period was slightly challenging for me. So that's the biggest problem, the biggest hurdle I faced there. So as to how can we one step around that thing is, the first part is just think thoroughly or deeply. I think everyone will do that. But the second part is look towards something on the horizontal activities that one participates in the office. Like if you led an initiative that was not directly related to your project, but you did it at a horizontal level in the office, like however small the opportunity that may seem to you, but if it had some leadership or some risk-taking potential, you should go ahead and share it. So that's my take on it.
Wonderful. So a lot of people are of the belief that if they have slightly lower work ex, then they should stick to applying to Indian colleges, or they should stick to taking CAT. So what was your thought process like? So why did you decide to take GMAT and apply to foreign business schools?
So personally, for me, to be very honest, I took CAT last year. So it was around 1.5 years of work experience. At that point of time, it made sense to me to go through the IIMs and the Indian B schools. But with roughly 3 years of work ex, that didn't seem that appealing anymore. I didn't want to be someone who is the senior most in his batch and from whom others learn a lot, and I wanted to be somewhere where I'm towards the slightly younger side in the batch, so that people have more experience than me and I can learn more from their past experiences. So that's why I wasn't that enthused about applying to IIMs this year. And so considering the feasibility of applying to the international B schools, so I was initially skeptical about doing it with this firm with such little work ex, but thankfully you convinced me. So and I think, considering that I received an invite from Ross and that was the only B school we targeted in US, I think it's safe to apply with such a little work ex. So if we talk about the programs that so again, these are my personal views and I have not validated them with many of my friends. So there are some programs like LBS or NCR where the course duration is towards the shorter side. Maybe you need to talk with someone before you apply to those B schools if you have a little work ex. That's my personal opinion. So it's a really a single point sample size. So, but that's what I think.
All right. So just to quickly summarize, so you took CAT last year. You were not fully convinced about the idea of retaking CAT again. So you decided to apply to longer duration MBA programs, right? Plus ISB in India, because of cost factors. Your advice is that if you're looking to apply to foreign business schools abroad, then when it comes to shorter MBA programs, for example LBS or NCR, then it's okay to apply with slightly higher work ex. But when it comes to 2-year traditional MBA courses, it's okay to apply with little work ex as well, as was your case.
That's what I feel about it.
Okay, so brilliant. So, what has been, the biggest challenges for you? So, you have already spoken about, figuring out stories. So, that's one challenge that people usually see, right? So, how did you overcome that challenge?
Okay, so I think it's just that you need to give a lot of thought about it and you need to dedicate time towards it. It didn't happen overnight. You need to discuss it with the people around you who are expert in this domains and who have been through this process. That definitely helps, but still it doesn't come around overnight. Like I still remember when we were writing applications for NCR. So for continuously around 8 to 10 days, every evening around this time, I used to pick up my laptop and move to a coffee shop just to think about what can I write. I'm not sure how useful what I came up with was, but yes, the time is definitely a factor. And discussing it with people who have been through the process, who are more experienced than you, definitely helps you.
So, can you suggest a few, profile building points for people who are applying with lesser workings? So, for example, one idea that you gave was that you can contribute at your workplace in terms of participating on extracurricular activities. What other ideas did you implement in your own case?
So, like, if I were to look back and, like, let's say, give this advice to someone who is a year younger than me and is thinking about applying to next year, what I'll say is that generally take a proactive approach in your workplace. So, rather than waiting for the opportunities or the projects to come towards you, you should go ahead and search for themselves. If you have that attitude, I'm sure you'll come across one thing or another thing, and you will have, like, if you start doing it now, within 1 year, you'll have enough to come up with some decent stories for your essays.
Wonderful. So, any parting tips in terms of preparing your applications that you would like to share?
Don't give them enough time. That's all I say. All I'll say, and discuss it with them with as many people as possible.
Got it. Wonderful. So those are very useful tips. So what we can do is that we can move on to part 2 of our discussion, which is discussing a little bit about your ISB interview process and experience, right? Okay. So just for starters, if you can just quickly share, the entire setup of the interview, who took your interview. You don't need to take names, and how long was your interview?
Yes. So my interview took place in Bangalore. There were 2 interviewees. One of them was from the same stream as my undergraduation, and he was an ISB alum who's now running a startup. The another one didn't share his LinkedIn profile with me, so I'm not so certain what his background was. But the interview lasted around 40 to 45 minutes. For me, it was slightly longer because that panel took that much time for every candidate. There were other panels who wrapped up around 30-35 minutes.
Okay. And what was the nature of the interview? Was it like conversational, or was it like a stress interview for you, or did they investigate one particular point? How did it flow?
So it wasn't exactly a stress interview, but it wasn't purely conversational interviews. There was definitely some aspect of cross questioning, but it was nothing compared to the interviews that we hear in the typical Indian colleges like in IIMs or FMS. They don't grill you, they don't toast you. That's definitely for there. They always have a friendly smile on their face. But if you say something fishy, they will definitely cross question you.
Okay, so alright, so just speaking about the basics. So one thing that I've heard from a lot of candidates is that when you are facing your ISB interview, you should read your application thoroughly, and you should read your resume and sort of validate your resume, etc. So was it the same case with you?
Spot on. That's exactly the case. So actually the people have access to both your application as well as your reference letters. So about reference letters, there's nothing much you can do in that domain, but at least for the applications, you should read them thoroughly. And I think even like while you're writing the essays, keep them in mind that something from this can be picked up and can be shot at you in the interview process.
Okay.
But yes, like most of my interviews, like at least the initial 20-25 minutes was centered around the content of my application.
Okay. Wonderful. So now in terms of the questions that were asked, so what specifically was asked to you? How did your interview begin, and how did it flow from that point?
Sure. So I think first of all, it started with my second essay. So I said I worked in repossessions domain. So one of the members of the panel was enthused about what is auto loan repossession. So we talked around 10-15 minutes around that, what the sector is, how I fit in this role, what changes am I making in my organization. And after then So this was the part where they discussed my current like job opportunity. In the towards the second part, I think it moved around somewhat or the other bit from my application essays. Like it was, I think, around my strengths or something. So initial first 15-20 minutes was centered around that, and then the typical MBA interview questions. Why do you want to go for an MBA? Why now? Why ISB is a good choice? So are there any other options that you had considered? So the general flow of questions. And the interesting bit that happened towards the end was, so since I wanted to go ahead in management consulting, they asked me what's the alternative if this doesn't happen. So I said, okay, I'll go up in internal strategy. So after that, they came up with this question. They say, okay, so one of your juniors, he sent a wrong email to everyone, and because of which the company had a huge loss, and you are about to be fired. So you have to give a 2-minute speech before the board telling why you should not be fired, and your time begins now. So I was completely caught off guard here, and I think this was something I did not expect at all. But since I mentioned internal strategy, they wanted to see that how I handled the crisis that was happening within the organization. So I think that's why they put this question for me.
Okay. All right. I'll quickly summarize what you have said so far. So one is that your ISB interview is generally conducted by 1 or 2 alums. In your case, there were 2 people who were conducting your interview. Your interview lasted for somewhere around 40-45 minutes. Since you wrote management consulting as your post-MBA goals, they generally ISB tests out by giving you a case, a management consulting case, but in your case, they gave you a situation to which you had to respond. Yes. And other than that, there were basic MBA questions that are normally asked on almost every kind of interview. So why ISB? Why? What other programs have you applied to? Why do you want to do an MBA now? Etc. Right? Yes. So I have 2 specific questions for you, which I assume that our audiences would be very eager to hear from your side. One is that they might have investigated you a little bit on why do you need an MBA at this stage in your career, especially given the fact that you're on the lower side of politics. So how did you defend that?
So basically, again, like this is again linked it back to my career goals. I said since I want to go ahead in management consulting, and that's actually a career shift for me. It makes sense to do it now rather than 1 year later. And since management consulting firms prefer young candidates, so I think I'll be a better fit now than 1 year later. That was the one thing that I told them. And second thing I told them was about the learning curve. So there are good enough ample learning opportunities in my current role, but I feel that the alternative, the MBA and then a career shift, presents with me better learning and growing opportunities. And I think they were fairly convinced with this.
Okay, so just a quick data point here is that, as Hamraz pointed out, that if you're looking to work in management consulting, then it's better you get into a management consulting role when you're on the younger side, because management consulting firms prefer to recruit younger candidates. So, especially at associate or senior consulting positions, for which they recruit from ISB. So that was Hamraz's line of reasoning, which was very relevant. So yeah, so that's wonderful. My second question was that how did you defend that you want to go to ISB and not to an MBA program abroad?
So in this case, I had pretty strong internal thoughts. So what I feel is, since I want to follow my career path in India, like even if I go to a USB school after 5 or 6 years, I want to come back to India and I want to build a career here. So in that case, it makes sense to do MBA from an Indian B school. First of all, the curriculum would be slightly tailored towards the Indian market. And most importantly, the bigger factor that personally mattered more to me was, so ISB will have more alums in India than, let's say, any other B school in USA. So I think that ISB gives me access to a bigger alum network post my MBA. That's why doing it from ISB makes sense for me.
Okay, wonderful. I think that's please don't copy paste these answers if you are facing ISB's interview, because they would kind of hear they would have heard Hamraz and they would prepare some sort of transcript. So don't copy paste these. Okay. So moving on to the next case. So just if you can quickly speak about if there were any questions around leadership or any weakness, strength sort of questions.
Nothing comes to my mind right now as of now.
Okay. Or any sort of so you spoke about one oddball question that was asked, where you had to think on the fly. So any other oddball questions that were asked to you?
No, apart from that, it was mainly tailored, tailored around my application or my resume.
Okay.
That was the first part of the interview, and the second part was around the general MBA stuff. All this was expected, so just one oddball question.
All right. So, in terms of preparation, what would be your advice to people who are facing an interview at ISB? What would you like to tell them?
So, as you mentioned, the first step would be to go through your application and just cover all the points. You should basically know what you have written and why you have written it. If there is something slightly interesting there, they're definitely going to pounce on it and present it before you. So that's the first part. Second part is, I think, doing some mock interviews definitely helps. It actually helps you in identifying what's the right tempo for the interview, and that actually helps you in the. I don't know how it helps, but it definitely helps in the actual interviews.
Wonderful. So great. So what we can do is that at this stage we can move on to speaking about your interview experience at Michigan Ross. Right? Just understand the primary differences between ISB interview at ISB and Michigan Ross. Alright, so we have been speaking with Hamraz. In case you're just joining us, Hamraz has already given us tips around how to prepare your applications. We're speaking about his ISB interview experience. By the way, Hamraz has already received an admit from ISB, and on this video, we are going to speak about Hamraz's interview experience at Michigan Ross. Right? Okay, so Hamraz, if you can just quickly tell us the basics of the interview, who conducted it, what was it like, and what were your initial impressions and how it differed from your interview at ISB?
Sure. So for Ross, it was first of all an online interview. It was a Skype interview.
Okay.
So Ross Michigan actually asks you to share the Skype ID with them, and then they reach out to you on the day of the interview. In my case, the interview was taken by a second-year MBA candidate at Ross. So initially it was scheduled to happen around 9 p.m. IST, but on that day they had a snowstorm in Michigan, and it actually happened for me around 3 o'clock in the morning Indian time. They gave me an option to take it on the next day, but I wanted to tackle it that day itself, so it happened quite early in the morning, around 3 a.m. So the first difference was while in ISB there was a lot of cross questioning in the interview, and you could use that to gauge how good or bad your answer was. In case of Ross, there was not much cross questioning. So the interviewer had a standard, I think she had a standard questions that she had to go through, and while I was answering, she was just noting down my responses for those questions. The interview for Ross was divided across two sections. The first one is the general MBA questions, and the second one is the behavioral questions. It was around 15-25 minute split.
Okay.
And in the behavioral questions, there were lots of behavioral questions, and there was some overlap between few questions. So if you are experienced towards a younger side, you might at times feel that you're short of stories to tell there. Just for example, these two questions are asked back to back. The first question was, what is your weakness? You tell a weakness and then you tell a supporting story. The second question is, tell us an instance where you failed. So in case we had used the both same story in the application for both the situations, in such a scenario, you need to come up with something on the spot.
Okay, all right. Okay, I think those are excellent tips. I'll just quickly recap because Hamraz said some very interesting points. So one is that your Ross interview is conducted by a student. So the way when a student conducts an interview, it differs dramatically from how an ad-com member would conduct the interview. Right? A student is given instructions, so he or she would have 10-15 questions that they need to get through. So they will be more interested in going through that list. So that's a very important difference. And if you're interviewing with Ross, please keep that in mind. Few other important points that Hamraz spoke about was that there were a lot of behavioral questions which are generally not asked at ISB. So behavioral questions basically are questions like talk about your strengths, weaknesses, tell us about a time when you failed, talk about what kind of feedback your colleagues will give you, things like this. So if you're on the younger side, as Hamraz is, with very limited experience, you might struggle for stories. Prepare your stories. Right. Alright, so let's delve a little bit deeper in terms of what kind of behavioral questions were asked. So you spoke about weakness, and the person followed it up by another failure question. So what other kind of behavioral questions were asked?
So I don't remember the exhaustive list of questions he went through, but I'll just talk about the questions that come across my mind. So one of the questions that stuck with me was, so tell us about an instance where you and colleague had a different opinion, and how did you sort it out? And then another question that came forward was, so if one of your teammates is not pulling enough weight, how will you handle it? So, and tell us an instance that you're proud of, these standard stuff. Like these are the some ones that I remember, but there were many more.
Okay. All right. And in terms of general MBA questions that were asked, so were they very standard, or did you find any difficult questions?
They were pretty much standard. The only question that was different for Ross is, like, since Ross focuses a lot on Ross community, they said that these two questions were interlinked. So why are you interested in Ross, and name two things that you really like about the Ross community.
Okay.
So this is something that I think it can be called a standard question, but this is something that I didn't face in ISB's interview.
Okay. All right. Now, in terms of school research, so since you were sitting in India, and I'm assuming that you did not go to the US, as I know by working with you, so how did you go about researching about the program, and what tips you can give applicants as to how to research US MBA programs?
So, like, initially I was slightly biased against the Ross, because as every other MBA candidate, I went ahead with the rankings and I saw, oh, FT ranks at 24, no, I don't want to go here. But so as you discuss with people who have more experience than you and who are at process, what I realize is, since the ultimate outcome of one of the outcomes of the MBA program is the placement, is the industry that I want to be placed in. So if I want to go into management consulting, I should look at the schools that have a higher proportion of placements in management consulting. So on that criteria, Ross really passed with flying colors. So that was one of the reasons why we went ahead and put an application there. So did I answer your question, or was there?
Yes, so you partly answered my question, but yeah, so just to continue from there, so any tips that you would like to share as to how people can research these programs? So one is rankings, you spoke about that.
So
any other?
I think it's more about what you personally want from a. So I think the best way to understand which school is bad, which school is do you want, is to understand the differences between them and see. So because most of the things across MBA programs are similar, it's just the differences that matter to you, and see which of those two different things appeal more to you. So for me, what appealed to in case of Ross was it had a very tight-knit community, and it had that campus feeling that some of the other B schools didn't have. So what I'll say is, go ahead and find out the differences in the schools. Like, there is enough material online to get to complete the research, and if you have some time, reach out to the alums. This is something that I didn't do. Maybe I should have done it, but these two things definitely help.
All right, wonderful. So just any parting thoughts in terms of your entire application process, since you have been fairly successful at it? So any final tips that you would like to share with prospective applicants in terms of interviews or apps?
In terms of interviews or apps, okay. So what I'll say is, just give it enough time. That is the most important thing, and keep an open mind about it. So at times the thought that comes in your mind and you're very confident about it, that may not be the best thing to write in your application or to say in your interviews. So for that, discuss it with people who are more experienced than you, who have been through this process, or even with your teammates and your friends. Having an outsider's perspective on these things really helps you.
Wonderful. So final question, how was the experience working with me? And you can just share that a little bit. It would be very helpful.
So I think the best part about working with you was the approachability. So whenever I reached out to you, you were always responsive in a really polite and enthusiastic manner. So I wasn't scared of texting you like that wasn't so good experience for you, but for me it really helped.
No. I think Hamraz is extremely kind. He is one of the kindest people you will ever meet. If you are on an ISB campus, and if you want to reach out to an alum, then reach out to Hamraz. I think he'll be an excellent guy to guide you.
And another part that I liked about you was, like, in our case, there was no cap on the number of iterations that we can have. So I don't think it ever came up in any of the discussions. So that is something that really helps you in sending out good applications.
Thanks, man. It was wonderful speaking with you. Best of luck. Right? And,
Thank you.
Great. So best of luck. Stay in touch.